Yo, what is up everyone? Back here with another video. Today we're going to be doing actually we do this a good chunk. I'm going to be doing a full March meta review. So I'm literally going to be going over every single important event in March, summarizing the metagame and the developments that we've had, and kind of just take you guys through it so you guys can understand where the metagame is currently at, right? Now, one thing of note is that I am going to be trying to obviously bring up the reoccurring teams and also talk about how the metagame has progressed. I would say that the beginning of March is way different from the end of March, right? And you can kind of see that as the formats progress. I also think Australia was a bit of an outlier in terms of like what was popular there. Don't get me wrong, like at that point too, like some teams hadn't been developed. So we're going to be going through it. So first off, I want to talk about Australia. So obviously at this Australian regional, we had a couple different teams that did well, but you'll notice that we didn't have any of the popular Zacian Groudon teams do well, right? Like any of the common Sun team. At this point, this team was still kind of being worked on, you know, behind the scenes. I'd actually talked to, if you look Sam Pendelis, I talked to him about Sun as well. He was considering bringing it, but he ended up bringing Zacian Ogre. But yeah, basically like pretty decent option there, but you know, didn't end up coming to this regional. The only version of it that did well was Alfredo Chin Gonzalez's version, right? And he ended up having like Charizard, but he had P2 and Regieleki as like, you know, the kind of slots there instead, right? Then you'll notice the popular Zacian Ogre team that ended up winning, you know, Victory Road with ended up having a couple of appearances. We had 1, 2, where is it? 3, I believe 3 appearances here. 4 appearances, right? We had Tornogre place decently, and we saw this Palkia Cali Ice team pop up. Now, this team had already been used before, and it was utilized like the previous month, but this was like the first time it really like came out into like decent success, and ended up getting second place at the regional with Zacian Ogre taking the win with Ferrothorn. Now, I would say this version had like it didn't have a significant impact on the metagame. We like basically never see it after this, right? I haven't seen this team at all since this regional. The only significant meta impact I think this had was like it kept like the Zacian Ogre stuff relevant, right? Like besides that, all these other teams, like there isn't actually really any crossover between like the teams from this regional and other regionals. Any of the Cali Ice Palkia teams in other regions didn't do so well, but we'll get to that. So, you know, overall, pretty interesting tournament. I mean, you can kind of take away that, like, Zacian Ogre was obviously still, like, in its prime at this point, right? And, like, the build that was being used was still really popular, right? So then now we have the IC next. Now, this is really important because every time there's an IC, we kind of get a look at, like, you know, the Japanese eyes on the metagame, which is actually really huge. Because it can give us different context on, like, the format, right? And it lets kind of players from like Europe and like America kind of like adapt those builds for their own uses, right? I always pay great attention. Now, really important, I was the only one, or one of the only two, I think there were 2 of us that ended up doing well. Okay, so there was another player that ended up doing well. I ended up getting second place with the Sun team, right? At this point, the Sun team was popular, but it had kind of fallen off a little bit in popularity. I recognized right after I played this in the IC how good the team was, and I was already sold on bringing it to, you know, sold on bringing it to Salt Lake City, right? I knew for a fact I wanted to bring it. Then we look at some other archetypes. Really important, Palkia Cali Ice, still relevant. It ended up doing well. Palkia Cali Ice had a lot more appearances this time around, and Shedinja ended up appearing as well. Now, these are really important things to point out because it did end up having a later impact on the metagame, right? Seeing, like, what went on later on, right? Now, you know, obviously we have like different Palkia Cali Ice builds, but for the most part, they generally have the same concept, right? Which is Palkia, Indeedee, Amoonguss, Cali Ice, Incineroar, and then usually a filler slot, right? It's usually double redirection. The other version of it usually has some other form of terrain, which is Finny now. But this was like really like where these Palkia Cali Ice teams started like kind of getting developed a bit more, right? So, you know, you continue down, you see some other stuff, Standard Sun. Okay, so, sorry, 2 teams were using Standard Sun, right? And you can kind of see the trend here. Then you see, like, the Finny version of this team, which is also pretty popular as well, right? But you get the general idea that Sun is still solid, right? So, Sun is still really good in this metagame. And this is, unfortunately, I guess I might have played a bit of a role in, like, you know, obviously it being used a bit more. Me and Chongjun specifically. It was more so Salt Lake City that like kind of influenced that. But like this is where we started figuring out it was really good. You know what I mean? I did not mean to click on that. But yeah. Solid team overall. Obviously, Rinya, who originally used this happened back in February where Rinya was using the 6, and then since then it was edited. Because even if you look at the previous Victory Road tournament, people were still using the Rinya version, which had like Iron Ball Grim, which I don't think is good. I like with this team, the current metagame developments it's at is like pretty solid to like where I think the team should be, right? But you know, that's pretty much the main thing to talk about, I guess, related to it, you know. So the next thing to keep in mind, right, when we're continuously, you know, approaching the metagame, right, is like a couple things to keep in mind, right? Shedinja, there's still Zacian Ogre around. They're more offensive Zacian Ogre. We're seeing like some other versions of teams, but for the most part, like that's the main relevant one, right? Calyrex Shadow and Zacian, this is like the last time we saw a significant performance from these two, I think. You know, there was one that ended up doing well here, but after that we had not seen too many successful placements from it, right? But just kind of gives you an idea of like where the metagame's shaping. So then we end up going to Salt Lake City Regionals, right? Now this is happening, I believe, the weekend after the IC, right? So, you know, kind of a big deal, you know. But we look over here. Now, what's really important is now Sun has basically guaranteed that it will become mainstream, right? Chongjun won with it. I ended up getting 3rd place with it. And, you know, it probably would have been a Sun Mirror in finals anyways, right? So, you know, it, was really big for popularizing the archetype at this point. Because it had just shown it was really consistent. Now, a couple of other things to note. Zacian Ogre, Aaron Trailer was using it. Definitely still solid. Whimsicott Zacian Ogre, still a good archetype. I do think Aaron's version will fall off a little bit or edit going into the future, but I do think that it still shows that Whimsicott Zacian Ogre is like a really good archetype, right? And also kind of a show that like Indeedee plus Zacian Ogre is really good as well, right? Then we go down here. We have Alex Arain using this Palkia team. I don't see this Palkia team being too popular in the future. I think that it has a lot of flaws, and I think that if you look, it actually resembles one of the Palkia Cali Ice teams. The reason why it works better on a composition like this is because you have 2 maxes, but on something like this, it's so passive, and you're always forced to like max Palkia, right? Which can like kind of limit the team. So I feel like on a Palkia Zacian team, you probably want like a better max option in that slot, right? That being said, the double redirection and stuff is always good with like these kind of partners. So that's just something to keep in mind overall. Then we have some standout pairs that were very, like, not common. Actually, I'd say, like, 3 out of 4 of the top 8 was, like, not common restricted pairs. Solgaleo and Calyrex. That's not something people would have called going in this tournament. I believe that got picked up a little bit as well going into the, like, later weeks. Like, people started trying it out. But, yeah. Then, Z was using the standard Yveltal Zacian team. I believe there's a team report out on that as well on YouTube if you guys want to take a look at that. But yeah, I mean, that build is common. You know, we actually saw it do really well. Snow was using it in the previous IC as well. It had popped up, I believe, where was it? Right here. Snow had used a very similar build. Edited build, but it, you know, it still shows that, like, it exists in the metagame, you know? Dustmane Necrozma Kyogre. This is the, like, something I would have never expected. I would have never called for this thing to cut. But in top 8, you saw it was very weak to the Rinya Sun team. Or, you know, the Sun team that me and Chongjun were using. So I'm not sure if it's an archetype that's really going to pick up too much after this. I don't think it necessarily has too much impact, right? So I wouldn't necessarily totally keep that in mind, I guess. Or, like, worry about that too much. Then we have Aaron's Solgaleo Groudon Charizard team. Now, the one thing that strikes me about this team, I actually think it's a really awesome concept that might continue to be used. Because that Scarf Bulldoze plus Solgaleo and next to Zard with Rock Tomb is actually a really cool idea in practice. The one issue that this team has is it kind of struggles against opposing Charizard, which is actually, you know, what Aaron had played against. He played versus Chongjun, right? So it made it, like, really difficult. And I think if it has a better answer for Charizard, it'll be much better off, right? Then we look at, you know, Ragna's team. I would say Ragna's team is, like, the first, like, Zacian Ogre team I maybe would have expected and cut, right? It's, like, the standard double Intimidate. You know, you have Ferrothorn, Grimmsnarl screens, and then you have Life Orb Kyogre. And, like, I think Life Orb Kyogre is really solid as well. But then we also see, you know, Kyle Livinghouse. He ended up getting 10th place. And then, you know, you continue down and you start to see a bit of different teams. Calyrex Shadow and Zacian, this is the first like, you know, performance from it where it ended up getting like in the top 16, right? Besides, you know, Bruce Main stuff. Then we continue down. I don't think there's any other crazy builds here that I would want to keep in mind. Let's see. Is there anything else interesting? Not really, right? Anything else past here is a little too much. Now, one thing to note is that Stefan Mott, otherwise known as Pangy, he did get, you know, top 32 with this team. And otherwise, you could have maybe, like, disregarded it because it's, like, you know, top 32, like, don't get me wrong, it's still good, but, like, it's not, like, you know, like, the craziest thing. But he does end up cutting Liverpool regionals, right? So it does show that this archetype is still actually pretty viable. Because, like, obviously there's a lot of variance in Swiss, right? Like, you can lose certain teams. You can pull some bad matchups. But it does show that the team is still, like, relevant. You know, it's not completely gone. Now, we're going to go down and look at Liverpool results. Obviously, keeping Salt Lake City results in mind, right? We kind of talked about the different influences there. Palkia absolutely gets wiped this tournament. I'm saying like Palkiazation absolutely gets wiped this tournament. No Palkiazation in the top 32, I think. Let's see. Calyrex Ice. Palkia is here. No appearance there. But yeah, like literally no Palkia and no Palkiazation here. And literally in this tournament, I mean, Palkiazation got 4th and it got... It ended up getting 21st. That was it. No other Palkia. Oh, there was one other Palkiazation. Sorry, Alex Anderson's team. Although I have no idea what this team is. But yeah, that was like kind of nuts, right? Like Palkia actually just got wiped this tournament, and it shows that like Calyrex Ice Palkia is like literally the only one that's relevant. However, it didn't even end up cutting. Now, worth talking about. Sun wins again, dude. Sun ends up winning this tournament. Wins another regional championship. I'm convinced if it had been used in Australia, it probably would have won Australia as well. At this point, Sun is basically those teams that forces neutral matchups pretty much across the board, right? So if you have a really good player piloting it, 90% of the time it will end up succeeding, right? And that's just something to keep in mind, right? I'm sure we'll find other archetypes that do the same thing, but like right now, Sun is the one that's mostly developed to that point, right? Then we have Hari. So I mentioned it's important to keep Shedinja in mind from the IC. We see our first application of Shed being used in a best-of-3 tournament that pops up and is successful, right? So we end up having, I believe it was Support Thunderous as well in this team, and Zacian Ogre. And Zacian Ogre, again, comes really close to winning. So it doesn't mean that Zacian Ogre is a bad archetype. It has come close to winning twice. I am sure that this thing will win a major at some point, besides Australia, right? But it comes really close, does not end up winning. Then we have Calyrex, Shadow, and Zacian, which ends up taking 3rd place. Super aggressive team. Ben Grissomer, if you guys don't know, Chef, loves running aggressive teams, right? That's kind of like his thing. Super aggro teams. I think he ended up doing well with this team as well in a Zelda challenge, which was like a money tournament as well, right? And then we have, Philip's team, which is Evil Dawn. Now, this was a really surprising performance as well. We've had a lot of surprising restricted pairs, like, actually find some success here, right? But it's using the Bronzong, Regieleki, Eveldon stuff, right? And it ends up coming really close to winning. Or not winning, but, like, I think it was really close versus Eric, because I believe they played versus each other, right? It was Eric versus Philip. And I believe that Philip, something happened that was really unlucky where he might have been able to win. So it's just really interesting to see, right? But it ends up losing in top 4. So Eveldon might be an archetype to keep an eye on, you know? Then we go down, we see Terran Birdie using Tailwind Zacian Ogre again. So it just shows that Whimsicott plus Zacian Ogre has a lot of viability in this format and will continue to exist. This time it does have a Moongus and Zapdos, though, and it is running Urshifu. So what's really interesting about this tournament as well is you'll notice in top 8, there were 3 Urshifus, which is like not something that was expected whatsoever. So it just kind of shows that maybe Urshifu is popping up a little bit more. Then we have Cameron Smith using Thunderous, Urshifu, Venusaur, Incin, Lunadon. Not something I would have necessarily called, but it does make a lot of sense if you're dealing with a lot of Zacian Ogre. I'm not too sure how it matches up in the Sun. I guess you have Defiant Thunderous, though, so you can't be the worst, you know? But yeah, it kind of makes sense. So we have another Sun team in, 7th place. And then, as I mentioned, Pengi ends up cutting at 7-1 and is using the Zacian Ogre team. So it just shows this Zacian Ogre team with screens. Still relevant, right? Continuing down, we'll see like other forms of Zacian Ogre. There were a lot of Zacian Ogres that ended up finding success. The same team that ended up getting second place is in 12th place as well. And, you know, we're starting to see some Palkia Kali Ice actually find some success. And also to note, another Solgaleo Groudon in the top 16. So, kind of shows you that that archetype still has potential and it's still around. So, overall, I think from these regionals, what we can take away from March, there are a couple of archetypes that are super successful, right? So, let me actually take out my notepad for this. Notepad. Okay, so we're going to review all of this now, right? Okay, so I would say what we've taken is the stronger archetypes and the weaker archetypes from this entire you know, overview of the metagame. Strong archetypes, right? Palkia plus Kali Ice, right? It's still relevant in the format and also still has potential to improve / find better builds. Better builds. Sun is arguably the most consistent team. Consistent team in the metagame. Whimsicott Tailwind, right? Whimsicott Tailwind with Zacian Ogre has a lot of potential. And will likely continue to find success. And then, as well, we can take away, you know, Solgaleo plus Groudon. Or I'm going to actually put this in, like, the... Still need more info. More info, but keep an eye on these. Right? And I think that, overall, right, these are the stronger archetypes that you can see. That have performed, like, really well. That, or at least, like, that have potential. I really feel like this archetype is strong. It's just there's something holding it. I think it's like might be just player difference. You know what I mean? And then Zacian Ogre Screens. Zacian Ogre Screens is still relevant, right? So, you know, we obviously take a look here. You know, it popped up a bunch in this tournament. We look over here. There was no appearances of it there, but like you see like offensive Zacian Ogre and like there was a still Screens team here, right? Continue here. I mean, you know, there was one Zacian Ogre Screens, I think, in the top, right here, right? But it ended up just popping up once. And then, you know, you continue down and, like, it ends up top cutting, right? So, like, it's still relevant enough, you know what I mean? Like, it's still there. As well, it's worth noting as well, Zacian Ogre Shedinja is pretty relevant, too. It's pretty relevant now as well. There was one thing, I had a conversation with Colin about this, actually, how, like, Shedinja was popping up more, and he did say something like, Shedinja gets worse the more people recognize it exists, which I think is, like, kind of true, but also, too, I think you can use Shedinja to great success. So, we've seen, like, a lot of, like, success with the Zacian Ogre archetype, we've seen a lot of success with Sun, and we've seen, Palkia Kali Ice, I think, was successful in the IC, less successful in practice in the Salt Lake City, but ended up, you know, obviously popping up in, Liverpool as well. So I think it definitely is going to have a cut eventually. Now, in terms of still need more info, but keep an eye on these. Solgaleo plus Groudon is something I would definitely keep my eye on. It seems like it's an archetype that is still developing and has some potential. I would also say that Calyrex Shadow and... was it Zacian also has some potential, and I would keep an eye on that build because it has popped up a couple times. Also, like in terms of the rest of in terms of general mons, I think Urshifu is maybe relevant, right? So this is like kind of the takeaway from there. It can maybe pop up a bit more, right? Now we continue down, and I want to talk about the weaker archetypes / concepts, right? I do think that the Palkia plus Zacian archetype is weak in its current state. To Sun, right? Now, this is problematic because you don't really want to, you know, lose Sun. So, I do think that it will have to develop or change. I think that the Porygon 2 version is substantially holding the team back. I don't think it's actually the correct version for the team. Now, in terms of the actual concept of that team as a whole, I think Indeedee, Amoonguss, Palkia, Zacian, and Incineroar, really good. I think the last slot is kind of what's up for debate with that kind of team, and there might be a little bit of variance with something else. But, you know, obviously we'll kind of see how that kind of develops, right? Now, A couple of other archetypes that I think are worth noting that might be a bit weaker, or at least we haven't seen perform as well, right? I would honestly say that's really interesting. There's another Lunala, actually. I wonder if Lunala is, like, actually decent. Kind of curious to see. But yeah, I would say actually, honestly, Palkia kind of disappointed me from what I've seen for tournament performances. Considering how much people were gassing it up, I actually think it's like a little bit lackluster, right? I don't think it's the best. I would also say Evolzation in its current state is still kind of mid into the metagame. It's still middle ground at best into the metagame. Now, I think that right now, we can see the format develop to where there's maybe an Evoltalization team and a Palkia team that can do better. But I think these two archetypes kind of let me down in terms of how they performed, right? Overall, I would say these archetypes I've highlighted up here seem to be the best archetypes right now. I could maybe see these two popping up more and, like, kind of having developments, but it is worth noting that, like, they kind of had, like, some middling performances. Like, Z and, you know, Kyle ended up doing pretty well with them. But besides that, you know, like, it ended up actually placing pretty decently in, like, up here. But I feel like this build can be improved a little bit, right? So that's worth noting. I'm also going to actually, see if there's anything else I want to go over before. I don't think there's really anything else I want to talk about. Maybe, also Zacian, or not Zacian Ogre, Calyrex Shadow and Kyogre could also be relevant. They're, like, kind of like the hyper offense, like, really strong damage dealer team of the format, right? Also to, I think, Solgaleo and Calyrex Shadow. Not necessarily the build we saw from Zach, but in general, right? Solgaleo, Calyrex Shadow. There was a build of it used in NPA, which is like a team tournament for VGC. And, like, it was used by Maluka, who ended up getting #1 in the IC, right? So it could end up having, like, some relevancy there. But that's pretty much, like, the takeaways, I think, from the, you know, all the tournaments overall. And this would probably be my March metagame review in terms of what I think is kind of relevant and what we would probably expect to see in the future. So if you guys enjoyed this kind of video, let me know. I kind of like going in depth. It's a lot of fun to, like, look over these results and kind of, like, give my opinions on it. Kind of my takeaways. So make sure to let me know what you guys think about this video. If you guys would like to see more videos like this in the future at the end of every month, maybe. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you for all the support. Make sure to check out Patreon if you guys would like to support me beyond the videos and get access to a bunch of different teams that I use and test. And yeah, do coaching if you guys would like to improve your skills, you know, one-on-one with me. Help you guys kind of work on your skills and do better, I guess. Play better. I don't know. But yeah, thank you guys and appreciate the support. See you guys on the next video. Peace.